Brilliant. So Tom and I are joining you to tell you a bit about the National Trust approach on trees and peat, particularly from an angle around data and decision-making frameworks that we use to help us create these holistic outcomes at sort of ecosystem and landscape scale. And yeah, it's interesting that we're in silos. Like I cover peat and Tom covers trees and woods, but absolutely our perspective is about how we bring this together in a joined up way. Next slide, please. So a bit of an introduction to our peatlands from me, and then I'll hand over to Tom to say a bit about woodlands before sharing some specific case studies about holistic approaches. So we've got about 25,000 hectares of peatland at National Trust across the 3 countries that we cover, although I suspect it is more than that. That is using a habitat proxy, and we know that our habitats don't fully reflect actually the peatland that's underneath them. So I suspect we have more, but these are the figures we're using until we get something more accurate, like the England peat map, for example. We know that 70% of our peatlands are degraded in some way, so it's similar to the national figure of around 80%. So for us, that means 17,500 hectares of peatland that we need to restore. And the targets that we've set ourselves is to have restored our most degraded peatlands, that's 13,000 hectares, have that under restoration by 2030 and the rest under restoration by 2040. Next slide, please. We've been doing peatland restoration for 2 or 3 decades across lots of our places, but we're sort of at the earlier in the journey at other places. We've ended damaging practices, on peatlands that did used to take place across National Trust estates, either in hand or working through tenanted land. And we have been peat free in our gardens for many years. We're advocating for governments to ban sale of extracted peats and advocating to end burning on peatlands as well. So we're doing lots of work in that space, but we know there's still lots for us to do. Next slide. So these maps, these are very detailed. Don't worry about all the details on here. Essentially, in a nutshell, where there is colour on these maps, these are the England, the country peat maps as they stand, and where they're telling us that we can find peaty soils. And then anything with a black border is National Trust property that intersects with peatland soils. So you'll see we've got some pretty significant holdings. There's the lakes. There's a really big patch here. We've got some up in Northumberland. I've slightly cut off the Yorkshire Dales there, but then we've got a string down the Pennines, so Yorkshire Dales. And going south, next slide. We also have significant areas in the Peak district and the South Pennines. Really big chunk in Wales. We own about 9% of the peatland in Wales, we think. And then some in the lowlands. So Wicken Fens are probably most well-known bit of lowland peat. Various little pockets associated with river systems in our lowlands in the southeast and southwest. And then some in Dartmoor, Exmoor, and apologies, Cornwall. I've cut you off. We've got a teeny bit in our Cornish heaths, and then a little bit in Northern Ireland as well. Next slide. So some of these are really iconic landscapes. About 95% of our peatlands are in the uplands, and you can find these often in some of our most visited landscapes, so in national parks and national landscapes. Bottom right is Divis in Northern Ireland, which is right next to Belfast. So real opportunities for engaging people and education and getting them to love peat as much as some of us do. Snowdonia, yeah, really big areas in Eryri and Banau Brycheiniog, as well as Mid Wales, Abergwesin, and then, as I say, really significant in the Pennine chain as well. And then some of our lowlands. Next slide. We've got areas, sort of strings of mires associated with some of the wall lofts along Hadrian's Wall. This is Wicken on the right-hand side. Small patches of raised bogs, and bottom left is the Argery in Northern Ireland. But we've got some small areas of lowland peats in the Lancashire Mosses, in bits of Cumbria and Pembrokeshire mires as well. So over to Tom to say a little bit about our woodland ambition and where we're at the moment.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I've just got a couple of slides here to give some context on woodland management in the National Trust. trees and woodland, and yeah, our targets for 2030 and delivering 20 million trees and the challenges of that. So firstly, a bit about my role. So I'm currently National Specialist for Trees and Woods, covering technical sort of support and strategic direction around the management and care of our existing woodlands, which span many ancient woodland contexts and rainforests and everything else in between. And then also, yeah, I'm an ancient and veteran tree specialist, cover tree safety management as well, and then looking at this sort of woody habitat creation space as well, that's helping to hopefully fulfill our targets around this 20 million trees agenda. So just kind of looking at National Trust sort of headline figures for trees and woods, we reckon we've got about 26,000 hectares of proper woodland, inverted commas, so that's kind of high canopy. Ironically, we want to create a lot more open space in that, obviously, to increase the habitat value. But yeah, we reckon we've got about another 50,000 hectares or so nationally of other wooded habitat. So that would be wood pastures, orchards, gardens as well, hedgerows, and yeah, millions of trees outside of woods across our estate overall. We're also thought to be the world's largest owner of ancient and veteran trees, which we don't shout about enough, and I wish more people knew about. So a great responsibility there. And yeah, overall, we reckon we've got about 13% of our land covered by trees in total. So we're used to managing trees in all manner of contexts, and actually, if you see the slide here, you can see some of those contexts there. So both, yeah, upland and lowland woodlands. I mentioned gardens, you know, shores between farmland, every type of tree management. And one of our challenges is making sure that we make high quality decisions wherever trees are perhaps in conflict or adding value to different habitats and other objectives, because I'm sure you know that National Trust are trying to do all things for all people in terms of our cultural and natural heritage. And yeah, there's a lot of different factors to consider and manage at the moment. We're also technically the UK's largest farmer as well. In reality, I think you'd say we mostly play a landlord role because we've got only partial influence on many multi-generational tenancy agreements, which can make, I guess, delivering what we would really like to see at pace more difficult. And actually, we're really having to work with the cultures around land management and helping collectively with people like yourselves to progress those and perhaps challenge some long-standing attitudes in places. But yes, absolutely bring others with us and learn from what they're doing as well. I don't think anyone's faced climate change before, so it's really important we listen to each other. And I think, yeah, great to have so many different perspectives shared on the sessions today, and it's just sort of highlighted how really that, to me, that listening and relationships are just so key, aren't they, to us finding the right solutions. Next slide, please. I thought I'd just share with you as well the stats behind our woodland cover by region. You can also see our sort of total land cover there as well. And yeah, large areas of the Lake District, making the north our largest region. And then you can see, as I'm sure you're aware, the most densely wooded part of England, at least in the southeast, got really high National Trust tree cover at the moment. So all of that is, I guess, presenting varying opportunities or challenges in terms of how we might bring more trees back into some of our important landscapes. And the other thing to say, I guess, is, yeah, in terms of that wide range of context we've got with trees and woodland types, is that, yeah, they really do vary from kind of a slither of a hectare or a single tree right through to kind of 1,000 hectare blocks of contiguous woodland. Next slide, please. So we have this lofty ambition for 20 million trees by 2030, and it's absolutely is a stretching target. As anyone who's been involved with woodland creation will have found, actually, I think everyone broadly agrees that yes, we do need more trees to help the environment, have the added benefit of of carbon sequestration, and that trees need to remain relevant and viable in the landscapes. But actually, where do we put them? So I think when this initially came out, and it's certainly a target as an organisation we've grown with, and so has the sector with similar drivers as well, but we're certainly looking more now at 20 million trees rather than where does one giant woodland fit in the UK. And so it's looking again at every type of tree being appropriate in the landscape, and hopefully, I guess, yeah, taking us back to an aesthetic that would have been more like what was there, certainly if you go beyond sort of 200 years ago. We're very fixated generally, not National Trust, but I think in the UK we get really fixated on the last 100 years, the last 200. But I think if we're going to really face into climate change and biodiversity net loss, then reaching further back than that is going to be essential. I think a lot of these visions often hark of something much further back in time. And our challenge is how to make that viable today with social factors and economics also to integrate. But really, yeah, what we want is certainly more trees, but yeah, to still retain a sustainably farmed, culturally and environmentally sensitive landscape, and that absolutely includes peatlands as well. And hopefully you can notice the peatland area at the front of this slide here in Exmoor's vision, which I think is now lost from the internet because it got controversial, but actually, yeah, you can see still absolutely front and centre and looking healthy in that 50-year vision, and thriving, re-wetted, the hydrology sorted out, and then actually further down the slope, perhaps trees on the edge there, preventing erosion and loss of that carbon and that really important habitat as well. And then beyond that, trees helping to integrate habitat. We see the change of plantation woods restored into more open orchards and deciduous woodlands as well. Not saying that perhaps some plantations don't still play a role. I mean, we still import the vast majority of our timber in the UK, and yet I'm sat here on a wooden floor in a house that's got wooden beams. So we do need to think about where that comes from sustainably, but not at the detriment of our really important landscapes and habitats at the same time. On to the next slide, please. So really, yeah, National Trust have kind of got a three area kind of strapline at the moment, a three-way benefit, if you like. From the goal from our land is to deliver for nature, climate and people, and to find overlap wherever possible. Obviously in the sector, we've got a long culture of productivity incentives for our land management, and they've taken precedence for a long time, and they're embedded in our cultures. They're how we think about woodland management, how we still train to woodland management to a large extent. And yeah, happy for you to stay on that slide with the cross, that's no problem. So this shows, yeah, don't know where this was, but I Googled and found this one. So this is a peatland being absolutely taken to pieces by, yeah, I guess a forestry plantation intervention there. And that's absolutely not appropriate in this day and age. And hopefully there's a greater awareness at the moment that actually there are really strong overlapping objectives, so whether you want a new woodland or to protect peatland environments. Next slide, please. So this is much more like what we want to see, and actually in peatland areas like the High Peak, where I was yesterday, this photo I took with a tick there. So yeah, we've got some great trial areas of high density planting in small clumps, and this is all, yeah, indigenous species. We've got a thorny ring around it as well to prevent overgrazing from the sheep that will likely remain there, at least for the foreseeable. And then in the middle, we've got larger tree species like a couple of oaks and some rowan in there as well. We've got quite a few different trial plots there, and actually this is a microcosm of our wider sort of change in attitudes, I think, towards how we're delivering this type of planting. We still hope to get our 20 million trees, but actually having more targeted, considered interventions in the right places is the way to go. And so there are other ones where we're literally just not planting any trees. You'll note there's no tree guards in there as well. We're trying to reduce plastic use and replicate structures and the foundations of a woodier landscape in the right places that will hopefully then give nature and natural processes some kind of footholds in the landscape to recover, and then we can step back again. But certainly I think that natural processes, as we've heard so many times today, should remain the key driver, but strategic and well considered interventions, whether that's sphagnum moss or using trees to increase structure and function of the landscape in a healthy way, we need to bring those in. We need to some extent at this stage fix what is broken, what we broke, and then be able to step back later in time. And I've mentioned peatland edges being critical and trees being a benefit to peatland habitats where they're in the right places and in balance with that as well. And even trees intercept rainwater, they intercept mist. You could argue they actually bring moisture into the soil that is going to help with those wetter habitats as well, relative to if they're not there. They drink a bit as well. So it's as I said, all in balance. And I think it's about knowing your site, doing your homework on it on a local site. There isn't a one size fits all. What's right for a landscape scale project isn't necessarily appropriate for a small site like the Fenland site. We saw the SSSI surrounded by an ecological desert, essentially, with the hydrology around it really not doing it any favours. So it's about cutting our cloth accordingly and prioritising for local sites, and then working with the people involved with those landscapes to see what kind of multiple benefits and sustainable outcomes we can bring. I think that's my last slide.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Next slide for me then. So as we've talked about today, we are really looking at that landscape approach, how we deliver for nature, climate and people. And these are some of the frameworks that we've been using to help us really make sure that our decisions are robust and evidence-based. Next slide. So we collect data across our properties. We are plugged into national schemes such as the Butterfly Conservation Monitoring, National Plant Monitoring Scheme, Breeding Bird Survey, so that what we're collecting is also comparable to national schemes and understanding what we're doing and how that might be, how our land might look different to the wider countryside, for example. And a specific example of how we're continuing to improve our knowledge of our places is our peat monitoring approach, which Tia on the call has developed with other colleagues internally, which is again modelled on some of the national schemes that are out there. So Eyes on the Bog and Peatland Code are really core components to this, but set up in a way that it's tiered so that people can access it at our places depending on their resources and their time and money to be able to really support this. So we know that we want everyone to be getting that basic level and ideally level 2, and then it will allow us to track impact over time following our interventions, as well as us understanding baselines. Next slide is one for Tom.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, so I think I thought it'd just be good to share these sort of 7 holistic core principles for our woodland management policy, which launched in 2022. And where possible, we apply this to our new woodlands as well. So in terms of, that term woodland, I guess it will be important to define what that means. And there is definitely a sliding scale that I'm not going to go into that rabbit hole today. But of course, that could be from one tree, which typically wouldn't be a woodland, but actually, to an area totally full of trees as well. And generally, we're looking in woodland creation to buffer and join important woodlands. So, and then between those and other features in the landscape, we'd then be looking at where trees fit in, and as well as open space. And I think typically, objective 1 here, increase the value of MCE woods for nature, would be where we've got areas of trees already. And we're actually looking to find those special features within that to then help clear around those, let light in, and to let those thrive as well. And that's a big part of our work in our existing woodlands. Number 2 there, you can see goes more into sort of how the woodland or wooded landscape is functioning from a landscape point of view, and those ecosystem services it might be providing as well. And hopefully you can see here that, yeah, these pretty much reflect that same order of priorities of nature, climate and people at the heart of them.
Thanks. Okay, back to me. So another one, next slide, please, Caroline. So this is very much in development, and this is our very early thinking around this, but we've been particularly, I guess, asking ourselves a question internally around, is the case different when you're thinking about trees and peat when it's shallow and when it's deeper? And we've obviously had some really great insight into that today, and definitely going to influence how this guidance moves forward. But we've had a really strong ask internally to help our teams understand what are the right land management decisions to make when it comes to shallow peat. And it really similar to the woodland principles that Tom was just going through. It's about nature first, but also thinking about balancing in carbon and decisions around carbon. Tree planting should only be considered where there are constraints that we know we can't remove in the future around recreation or restoration of wetland habitat. Tree establishment is very much part of the picture. But we're also exploring again where we expect land to remain under agricultural production, that we would be looking at protecting the peatland there, potentially under things like paludiculture. So yeah, we're really interested if anyone else is thinking through similar things, because I think lots of these could apply in general to peatland and not just shallow peat as well. So there's some frameworks and data that we've been using to help us make decisions. And then I'm just going to share quickly a few case studies that bring that to life. Next slide. So South Pennines and the High Peak, where we're really looking, really similar to Dovestones that Kate was describing earlier, we're looking at how that tree and peat interaction plays out, particularly on the break-off slope where the trees and the peat are starting to interact. And we've done a bit of work in both those landscapes where we started with opportunity mapping, so looking at where we can put trees as sort of the beginning question, but mapping in everything from landscape character through to recreational value, historic environment, looking at habitats and species, their sensitivities, but also the opportunities to enhance them, looking at what local policies and strategies and plans are telling us, including agricultural productivity in that mix, and also mapping out the viability of tree establishment and management in these different landscapes. And then we back that up with the detailed information that we've got on the ground of various species and habitat surveys and historic environment records, and really using the schemes that are out there and the funding that's out there to help us do that. And co-creation and consultation is absolutely essential for us at National Trust. Lots of our land is tenanted and we're working with tenants to really deliver for nature, climate and people. So it's important that in all these processes we're using the information and insight from them as one of our bits of data. Next slide. And to help us do that, we've created some really nice visualizations. So this is one for the High Peak that some of you might have seen, is in the High Peak vision. And this really helps us engage people to imagine what the landscape might look like, and actually looks fairly non-threatening. I think this is a really nice way of showing that you don't lose that landscape value, it enhances it. And the top tips from the team that have been working on this, Dan sort of touched on it, is when we're planning, you're often looking at polygons in a spatial data set and going, a woody polygon here, a peaty polygon here, but it's not like that at all. It's sort of removing your brain set from that polygon approach and thinking about the landscape approach, and actually in each of those polygons, yes, we might want to be encouraging trees, but at different densities and in different structures and at different parts of the landscape, and that those transitional zones are really important, and that we want it to be messy and natural, not set out in those polygons that we might be using to do our initial opportunity mapping. Next slide. So just another example of a visualisation, this one for March Hague at Marsden Moor in the South Pennines, showing current landscape on the left and then a visualisation of 50 years time post tree planting. Again here, really useful local data use. So went through the woodland planning grant to do this, and actually some of the process there did rule out areas for tree planting because of proximity or locations of peat, but we had great support from local Natural England and Forestry Commission advisors who went out and ground truthed this and actually put areas back in for that tree mix in these sort of habitats. So very much working to some principles here about distance from top of cloughs and things that we're planting. We use Mows for the Future's clough woodland guiding principles that were developed for both the Peat District and the South Pennines, which have been really great. Next slide, please. So that's tree planting, and then similar to what Kate's been seeing at Dovestones, we're also experiencing those tree establishment naturally coming back into our uplands, particularly where we've done peatland restoration and reduced the grazing pressure as a result. And this is an image across one of our high peak areas again. So we're kind of keeping a watching brief on these, but a relaxed watching brief. We're in conversation with Natural England about what this means for SSSI, for example. We're really keen to see this more diverse structure, completely in line with what we've talked about today, about making sure our priority is restoring our blanket bogs, but really want to encourage those natural processes and be led by those. Next slide. So quickly, a bit of a different example from the lowlands. So Wicken Fen. Here, it's all about big part of this is SSSI. So the sort of heart of the area here, the northern parcels that you see are a mix of scrub and sort of paler grassland, is the SSSI. And again, we use really long data sets. So we've had a relationship with Cambridge University for a long time, being so near to them, that allow us to use a mixture of information around invertebrates, birds, botany, to help us make decisions about the balance of scrub there. Water management is absolutely key for how we decide to manage the scrub as well. So we might, if we're needing to reduce scrub cover, we would be likely to take that out along a ditch, for example, where if we know that it's impinging water flow around the site, or that we need to get in and manage that ditch. But being totally honest, resources is also one of the things that we consider here, and what is possible, and investing, flagging that and investing in some more modern technology. For example, we used to do lots of our management by hand, but investing in machines that will help us do that. And we also take that wider landscape perspective. So what does this look like in the greater fens? We know Cambridge is one of the least wooded counties in the UK, so considering that in the mix of decision making as well. And then our last slide is just a quick forward look for a couple of things we're working on to help us work through some of the sensitivities, opportunities, challenges around that holistic approach. So commissioned by the major landowners group, which brings together SSSI owners in England, we're testing how far the new feature-based monitoring approach can go towards supporting more naturalistic landscapes in the Peak District. So very early days with that, but looking at how we can test that approach and see what flexibility and limits there are within there to allow for that change at a feature level. Now we're not just looking by unit. Over to Tom to say a bit about the one team approach.
Yes, we've just got a new sort of pilot partnership that we're rolling out in 2 areas at the moment. So the High Peak being one of them, or actually, the Peak District, and the other one is in the South Downs. So an upland and a lowland context to work in. And really it's about some opportunities in each of those places to increase tree cover, more so in the bracket of woody habitat, but including woodland as part of that. And looking at how Natural England, National Trust and Forestry Commission can align on that in terms of the sort of systems and processes, the grants systems as well, the regulations around those opportunities, and how we might streamline things to be able to create overlapping outcomes, really. So we just thought we'd include a little bit of that. It's still in very early stages at the moment. And I have seen in the comments actually a question about wood pasture, perhaps being an easier sell to tenant farmers, etc. And certainly in the southeast where I'm based, and where we have got those larger opportunities, that seems to be the case, that wood pasture is a hot topic. And I think that's really where you come into that conversation about what is a woodland. So, and what is a wood pasture? Because a lot of the CS grants in recent years have been awarded for wood pasture and parkland priority habitat. And that's such a vast range of different aesthetics, from everything from kind of 5 trees in a field with very little diversity in the sward, etc., or from those trees really, right through to something that's kind of, what I see as the ideal, which would be sort of 30% high canopy, 30% scrub and 30% open space as well, and a naturalistic approach. And so we're giving the same grants to people for delivering a very varied range of habitat qualities, which I think is quite interesting. And I think if we could influence people to think a bit woodier about those types of interventions, then I think we'd easily reach the 20 million trees target, as well as creating some incredible habitat as well in those areas that are kind of started from ground zero as well. So that's my 2 pennies worth on that one. I think that's what we need to make sure we put pressure on people to do a bit more of it as we move forward with enhanced grants just about to land as well.
Real. Thanks, Tom. I've managed to keep everyone else to time except the session that we were in. So we've got 10 minutes left, but hopefully that's been a useful insight from where National Trusts are at with this, and a bit of around data and collection and decision making. I wonder if we just do 5 minutes questions, Tia, and then just leave me 4 or 5 minutes at the end to wrap up and share the site visits.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll go for a question for each pair.